game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One2One.
Hello and welcome to One2One. Ola Brown is founder and general partner of Healthcap Africa, a venture capital firm that focuses on early-stage investments in the health tech and fintech industries. She trained originally as a doctor and founded an emergency air ambulance service called Flying Doctors straight after medical school in 2007. In 2018, she co-founded a venture capital firm called Green Tree Investment and remains passionate about financing health tech startups across Africa. Ola Brown, welcome to One2One.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm really interested in your story. Obviously, you began professional life as a medic. You trained as a doctor, and you found your way into this wonderful world of venture capital.
Yep.
I'd like to hear your story. Who is Ola Brown?
That's a really interesting question, and I could answer it in a number of ways. But I think I'm somebody really passionate about development on the continent, particularly in the technology space. I'm a person that thinks about entrepreneurship and job creation as drivers of economic growth. And I think that, if we can solve the problem of economic growth on the continent, then we'll lift 1 billion people out of poverty. So that's sort of what keeps me up at night and keeps me working during the day.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for that. Interesting introduction to many of the things that we will talk about. So you founded Flying Doctors quite early in your journey. Mm-hmm. In July 2018, along with other partners, you founded an early-stage venture capital firm called Green Tree. Green Tree Investment Company, to provide capital to African tech startups. You still sit on the board of that organization. As we've already said, you trained originally as a doctor. You hold a bachelor's degree in medicine, master's in finance. You've published 5 books and counting. I'm interested in your early life. You made the decision quite early, of course, to go into the life of medicine, but somehow, at some stage, you pivoted the other direction. Can you start from quite early in the trajectory of your life and trace it through for me?
I don't know how early you want me to start, but I'll start at the beginning. I grew up in a town called Lowestoft. It's the most easterly point in England. I'm not sure many people have heard of it. And I grew up with my foster family there. And one of the things that I guess I felt growing up was that, I wasn't seeing many people that looked like me. And I think, I started thinking about Africa and Nigeria quite early in that trajectory. Fast forward to when I was in medical school, my younger sister, who was 12 years old at the time, came to Nigeria. And that time I was doing my clinical rotations in Yorkshire. And she got really ill. And there were some basic things that I thought, I don't know why I assumed this, I just thought would be in place that weren't. And as her situation deteriorated, for the first time I realized what a big gap there was between stuff that was so easily available on the NHS and what was unfolding in real time with my sister's care in Nigeria. And I started thinking, even if I moved now, like halfway through medical school, I could probably try to do something that could improve the healthcare system. If like 20, 30, 100, 500 Nigerian medics, nurses moved, then we could probably make a difference. And I wanted to be part of that. So I did finish my degree and started immediately plotting what I could do, a little section of the healthcare system that I could influence. And I thought one thing that I could do was, I was learning to fly during my house officer years. Right. So I thought, why not combine emergency medicine and acute medicine with aviation? And that's how I came up with the Flying Doctors idea to bring to West Africa. And so I moved almost straight after medical school and started a business. And it's quite weird to start a business at that age because people feel like you should have at least an MBA as a doctor, as a give injection doctor, because people now ask me like, what kind of doctor are you? Because they hear me speak about finance and they're like, oh, you know, what kind of doctor are you? I'm now almost finishing my PhD in finance. So I can actually say that I do have like a doctorate in something else.
A proper
Yeah,
doctorate.
a proper doctorate. But then they're like, oh, you know, what are you? A give injection doctor doing a business? It's like weird. But I think, you know, at the time that I did it, I didn't have so much to lose. I mean, it's a very different conversation asking a consultant or an attending with a family that relies on them to move to Nigeria and take like a massive career risk as well as a massive financial risk. But you know what house officers earn, so it wasn't so much of a financial risk. It still was a career risk, but it was, I felt like, a really good time to do it. So I ran that company for a few years. I got an opportunity to take some liquidity from the company. And it was at that stage that I realized that I'd never actually managed money before, not for myself and not for anybody else. So I thought about a few ideas of what I could do with it. But eventually I landed on private capital and private markets, and that's where I've been working ever since.
Okay. So I want to use this to begin to delve into what is now your passion, you know, finance, health tech, fintech. And I want to center that discussion around where we are, Africa, Nigeria. So Africa has too many small businesses. That's an Economist article from January this year. What does that mean, really? Here's your chance to dip into.
So I think it was almost 10 years ago now, McKinsey & Company published a paper called Lands on the Move. And one of the things that they analysed is the number of Fortune 500 companies that different regions of the world had produced. And Brazil has Fortune 500 companies. India has Fortune 500 companies. Asia has Fortune 500 companies. Africa has not yet produced one of the biggest 500 companies in the world. When you even look at companies from that report at that time that make $500,000 and above, there were only about 25 in Nigeria. Half of all big companies in Africa were in South Africa. And what do big companies do? They employ people and they provide business for medium-sized and small companies that do B2B sales. So without big companies, you know, you don't get the capitalization on the stock exchanges that you want, you don't get the employment that you want, you don't get the tax revenue that you want. And, you know, our companies need to go from startup to scale up. We have a huge number of micro businesses and small businesses, but a lot of them operate in the informal sector. So how do we get them to formalize? How do we get them employing more people? How do we get them to pay tax? How do we get them to scale and list? How do we get them big enough for private equity? These are sort of the questions, major questions for sorts of finance people, people involved in financial engineering, people working in the finance sector to answer, because that's key to economic growth. What is economic growth? What is a big economy? It's an economy with big companies paying big taxes, employing lots of people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's delve a little bit further into what that actually means. So what you're saying really, what I think we are saying so far, is that one of the big differences between us and the more developed economies of the world is the way our businesses are structured. And the size of businesses are here. Big businesses employ, of course, lots of people, create more infrastructure. But of course, there are those, again, who, whilst we're having the discussion about innovation and accepting the need for Africa to innovate very quickly, there are those who would want very quickly to talk about the level of risk that comes with that. Now, of course, you run a venture capital firm, and your answer to innovation, or part of the way you assist this is through technology. So you invest in tech startups. Of course, many of these startups are coming to you with nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation. I think it's fair to say. And you have to conceptualize that risk. You have to assess it and decide who to back. Okay, bearing in mind we're trying to solve big problems here. How do you make those decisions?
Absolutely.
Where you sit?
So I'd like to talk about the issue of risk first, because I think that one of the biggest problems is like an understanding of what risk really is. And I think, people say that venture capital is risky. I think the alternative to venture capital is extremely risky. Because if we don't innovate and we don't fund innovation, then we stay like this.
We'll stay where we are.
So when anybody says, venture capital is risky, I'm like, look outside.
Yeah. The world is leaving you behind.
Yeah, whether you're in Nigeria or Congo or Kenya, just look outside your window. Do you want to remain like this? And what got people that did not remain like this out of this? Yes. It was innovation. And venture capital is a tried and tested way of funding innovation. So I don't think the risk is in the asset class. I think the risk is in not embracing this asset class. But then the issue is, how do we now pick the winners? And I think that that's a bit of a science and a bit of an art. First of all, you need a huge deal pipeline. So you need to be seeing, I would say, about 1,000 deals a year to be able to get the pool to choose from. And then you need to be continually speaking to founders. And there's a lot of pattern matching involved in terms of what actually makes a great founder. But in general, it needs to be somebody with a special skill, somebody with some sort of deep subject matter expertise, and somebody that has done it before. That's always a good indicator that they can do it again. It's also that they're tackling a big market. So there's sometimes people see a gap in the market, but there's not really a market in the gap. So a lot of the work that we do is around looking at the market and assessing the market. And that's why we concentrate on just two sectors, fintech and health tech, because we know those markets really well as a firm. And obviously being a doctor, master in finance, PhD in finance, focused on fintech, and I'm just completing that. That helped me to sort of have really deep academic expertise as well as experiential expertise as an investor to really understand those markets and help our team dimension those markets. So I'd say it's a founder and the market. It's a product as well. So we spend a lot of time on the product. If they've built an MPV, looking at what traction they've had with the product or the quality of the product. And in VC, we say that we look at the jockey, the horse, and the market. So we look at the jockey, the founder, the person riding the horse, because that matters in a horse race. And then you look at the horse, you look at the business, and then you look at the overall market. And you want to especially know whether there's a big enough market for the product, because if you're backing a rapidly scaling business, then it needs to be in a large market. Otherwise, you'll get what you call pseudo market fit and the growth will stall. So you want to make sure that the market is big enough. And then you want to look at the founder or the founding team, what they've done before, what sorts of indications from their workplaces, for example, or their businesses that they've started, or their academic record shows grit and shows discipline. Because people that have gotten great grades in school, people that have gone through transitions, people that have worked in early stage businesses, people that have, sold a lot in their jobs and have had to do a lot of selling tend to be indicators of grit, but also what kind of expertise do they have, particularly in deep tech, biotech space. Sometimes they have ideas that are hidden from the rest of the world. Some PhD in some area of a tiny molecule that people don't really realize its potential. So we do a lot of research around their research and try and see what deep subject matter expertise they have, speak to our colleagues in pharmaceutical firms, and really see whether their ideas have legs and they're acquirable assets.
Sure. So of course, part of what I'm hearing from you is that also from your point of view, what one really wants to do is back a subject matter expert. in that area.
Yeah.
That is, of course, euphemism for back Ola Brown if you're looking into health tech and fintech. Okay, so I'm going to ask us to pivot a little bit to the other side and talk about what we know is a looming, again, that word again, risk. I'd like to bring up and remind us of a company like Okra, joined the long list of African tech startups that have folded. Of course, after raising millions of dollars internationally and attracting talent as well. You've already alluded to this, but what exactly was missed there? And what are the pitfalls, actually, that someone in your position and investors ought to be looking out for along this journey of aggressive innovation?
So I think the first thing to point out before anything is entrepreneurship can embarrass anybody.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's not fair. Entrepreneurship is not fair. I always joke with the Bible verse. I say that entrepreneurship is no respecter of persons. There's a Bible verse that says that God is no respecter of persons, and I think God and entrepreneurship have that same sort of approach where I've seen entrepreneurship embarrass people that you would never think based on their qualifications, their track record and their CVs. And somebody with a primary 5 education can wake up in Enugu and do that same business and be successful without any of those qualifications. And actually, one example that I give is a long-term capital, which was a massive algorithmic hedge fund started by a Nobel Prize winner in finance. And you would think that what is the best, deepest subject matter expert that you could ever find, right? It's somebody with a Nobel Prize in finance, that his Nobel Prize was won for the business that he was about to start. And that business failed so badly that it was one of the only hedge funds that actually had to be bailed out by the central bank in America because he made some pretty basic mistakes. So how do we avoid failure? In entrepreneurship, there's no way of avoiding failure. A lot of failure in entrepreneurship just comes from poor timing. It comes from poor strategy. It comes from maybe too early. So I always talk about the technology that was used to make blockchain. I think the person that designed that technology died thinking that his innovation was a failure and it was just too early. When you think about the early iterations of social networks, for example, they just didn't get that inflection point. And there's a really amazing book called Good to Great. And it compares academically companies that were started at the same time, in the same market, with similar teams, with the same resources. And one went bankrupt and one did really well. And it compares these pairs of companies, and it does about 6 of these companies. And he does it again, the same author in Built to Last, a follow-up book, and tries to analyze what actually separates people in exactly the same markets that do exactly the same, seem to be doing exactly the same thing. And one succeeds and one fails. And there's a huge number of factors that, it would be very, very difficult for anybody to predict. However, there are ways to manage the risk of entrepreneurship. And I think that that's really the focus. We can't really hyper-focus on the things that we can't control, but there are some things that we can control, and that's what we aim to do at Healthcap. So I think the first thing that companies suffer from sometimes is overfunding and empire building. So when I use the term empire building, I mean the first step to becoming a big company is becoming a successful small company. And I think that sometimes founders miss that step. So they raise lots of money, they hire lots of people, and they think they're hiring the right people because they hire people from big companies. But the job of an executive in a big company is very different from the job of an executive in a small company. So I can remember sitting at this American startup, and he was talking about his company that failed, and he hired somebody from Google. product developer, as his product manager, and he spent his entire seed round on one hire, because they tell you as an entrepreneur to hire the best people. So obviously Google is the best people. And they were supposed to be churning out lots of products, like almost on a daily basis within this startup. But what he didn't realize is this hire from Google had spent his entire 10-year career managing the outbox function of Gmail. So this was, and he was part of a 100-person team, and he was doing a very small part.
He didn't realize that.
I think the idea and the privilege of hearing somebody that wanted to leave Google to join his startup made him spend all the money that he had. So I think one of the things that people don't realize when they're interviewing is that talent and the best talent for an early stage company is very different from the kind of talent that you'd need from at a scale up, and it's very different from the kind of talent that you'd need for a large company. So even if the CFO of a $19 billion company offers to work for free at your startup, it's going to be difficult for this person, and he might not be the right fit because there's probably like 200 people on his finance team. He doesn't do a lot of the things that he would have to do at a startup. The CFO in a startup might also have to function as a sales manager, might also have to do a bit of HR. So what you need is an army of generalists to begin the journey with you. That's 0 to 1. It's the most difficult thing. I think I kind of, people took it the wrong way when I said that if you make me CEO of NVIDIA, then I'll probably do okay. That's not an arrogant statement. That's to just say that a company that already has recurring revenue, that has customers, that is already big, like it's relatively easy to get there when it's done.
Correct. Yeah.
But that 0 to 1 stage, very, very difficult. Very few people can do it. And you need to be all in at that stage. When you get to 10 to 100, it gets a bit easier. When you get to 100 to 1,000, honestly, like you have the team to do it. It's like it gets a lot easier. And that's why when people ask me, like, especially in England, of course, they'll say, oh, you know, if Nigerians are so smart, like, why don't they go and fix their country? Why can they only be so smart in England? And I'm like, it's easy to work in a system that is already functioning. But 0 to 1, you need a critical mass of highly talented people to do it. Whether it's in nation building or whether it's in entrepreneurship, it's the same kind of concept that applies, where, you know, that's one problem. I can't go through all the problems because we don't have much time, but that's one problem that I thought, you know, a lot of people don't realize intuitively.
So very unique and very particular skill set.
Absolutely.
You build from 0 to 12.
0 to 1.
Or 0 to 1. And but my question, of course, is how does that big time CFO find himself up there? If he's probably never been involved in a startup.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's you know. So we've talked quite a lot in this conversation. You've already distilled quite a lot of wisdom in a few minutes. But I'm interested really because I still find your journey quite interesting, quite a hugely interesting journey. Who or what have been your main inspirations along this path in this journey?
I would say my biggest inspiration of all, and if you follow me on social media, you already know this, is Aliko Dangote. He's been my biggest inspiration as an entrepreneur. I just wrote a long article about him on LinkedIn. And I felt like my article wasn't like, you know, all praise, right? I also said he's had some downsides, he's had some failures. In fact, he's had more failures than he has successes. Didn't do very well in the noodles business, in the tomatoes business, in the juice business. If you count his failures, they're more than his successes. But I think he has a really resilient spirit. And I think the biggest sort of factor for any entrepreneur is that resilient spirit and being willing to try again and being willing to think through different ways and being willing to have the emotional sort of capacity to tolerate setbacks.
Of course, like grit.
Yeah.
Which really is the one thing more than anything else that a life and educational system aims to give you.
Yeah.
So we are in a particular period in our country this time. We're speaking here in the week that follows the passing of a former president, a former head of state, President Muhammadu Buhari. And plenty of talk, plenty of reflections now on what his legacy will be and what he has bequeathed to this country going forward. And I say that to make the statement that the question, of course, of legacy is really, really important for our existence. What would you, Ola Brown, like your legacy to be? I asked that of you at a tender age of, do I dare declare it, 39. It seems a totally premature question to ask, but I'll ask it all the same. What would you like your legacy to be, and how close would you say that you are, quite odd, to achieving that?
That's a big question.
It is, deliberately so.
And it depends on sort of the stage of life that you are, what you want your legacy to be. And I think it depends on the kind of decisions that you make, and not everybody has the same perspective on this at all. I mean, some people want it to be their business achievement, some people want it to be their family, some people want it to be their inventions, some people want it to be academic research. But for me, thinking on the question of legacy and what I would like to be remembered for, I think it's a combination of all four of them, really. Being a super dedicated wife to my husband, but being super dedicated to my business as well. And making that little, I mean, Steve Jobs says, aim to make a dent in the universe. So making that little dent in the universe. I'm not sure that I'm going to really, hardly anybody, in 100 years' time, hardly anybody will be remembered for anything. But in terms of legacy, just making a tiny, tiny dent while I was here.
And back again to the metaphor of the horse, the jockey, the market. And I add to that the crowd, those who are there cheering you on. You spoke very briefly about how important it is for you to be a super dedicated wife to your husband. How important has family been to you in this journey of grit, obsession, and discipline so far, Ola Brown?
So I am a big marriage advocate. I'm always I really think that if you're not married, you need community. So some people say, marriage doesn't matter to me. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not talking about marriage in the specific sort of partnership of husband and wife. You can have, a community of women. You can have a community of other men. You can have a community that involves your parents. But I think community in general is important. Relationships are important. And having people that have your back is important. And definitely for me, having community and having, an amazing husband has been, absolutely a big part of my journey. And, I mention it as probably in any interview, that he's like a massive part of my life. And, I wouldn't be able to, he gives me a lot of energy and inspiration on a day-to-day basis to keep on doing what I'm doing. So sharing your life and growing old with the right group of people, I think is really important.
Ola Brown, from Lowestoft to Lagos.
That could be the title of my next book.
Absolutely. I've just gifted you that one. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
One-to-One.
Thank you.
Thank you.